Welcome to the next shocking chapter of Fatima and You, where vengeance, guilt, and redemption collide. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet village as Yu's footsteps echoed down the narrow, dusty path. He had returned from the city with gifts in his bag and joy in his heart, eager to surprise the woman who had lit a fire in his soul. But the moment he reached the door of his home, that joy turned into a chilling silence. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Fatima, he called, his voice uncertain. No reply. The door creaked open beneath his hand. The air inside was heavy, unnaturally still, and then he saw her. There she lay, crumpled on the cold, hard floor like a withered flower, her skin, pale lips tinged with blue. A fragile hand still clutched the corner of her dress. Her eyes were closed forever. Yu's scream tore through the stillness like a blade. "No, Fatima!" He dropped to his knees, gathering her lifeless body into his arms, rocking back and forth like a madman. His tears soaked her hair as he whispered her name over and over again, like a broken prayer. "Wake up. Please, please." But she didn't stir. She never would again. Neighbors gathered outside, drawn by the sounds of anguish, yet none dared to enter. None dared to meet Yu's eyes that now burned with pain and the beginnings of something darker rage. That night, Yu did not sleep. He sat beside Fatima's body, clutching her hand, replaying every memory of her laugh, her voice, her smile. And then he noticed the teacup. It stood on the table, untouched, except for a faint red stain near the rim. Fatima's final act had been to sip from that cup. Yu's grief began to shift. The pain in his chest sharpened, turned into a spear of suspicion. His instincts screamed, she didn't die naturally. Someone did this. He took the cup, and in the early hours went to the village herbalist, a wise old woman who knew every plant, every poison. She examined the contents with narrowed eyes, sniffed it once, then twice, and when she looked up, her face had gone pale. "Nightshade," she said quietly. "A slow-acting poison. Just a few drops and the heart stops, but only if someone wanted it to." Yu staggered back. His heart pounded like war drums. "Who gave this to her?" he demanded. The herbalist hesitated. "I don't know, my son, but this isn't an accident." Yu stood silent for a moment. Then the memories came flooding in, the way his mother had treated Fatima, the hateful words, the cruel chores, the disdain in her eyes. And then he remembered what the villagers whispered that on the day before Fatima's death. Rukiadu had given her tea as a peace offering. The world spun around him. It was her, his own mother. He returned home trembling, the teacup still clutched in his hand like a weapon of truth. Rukiadu was in the garden trimming flowers with surprising calmness, as if nothing had happened. Yu approached slowly. "Mother," he said, voice like ice. She looked up, startled. "Yu, you're back. Stop." There was a pause. The wind stilled. "Tell me," Yu said, holding out the teacup. "Did you give this to Fatima?" She faltered. I made her tea. She wasn't feeling well." "What did you put in it?" Her silence was answer enough. Something broke inside Yu. Something primal. "You poisoned her," he whispered. "You killed my wife. You killed my child." Rukiadu stepped back, face tightening. "She bewitched you. She was a curse to this family. I did what needed to be done. You murdered her." His voice thundered across the yard. Birds scattered. A pot fell and shattered on the stone. "She was carrying our baby." His chest heaved. "You didn't just kill her. You killed your own grandchild." For the first time, Rukiadu looked unsure, but it was too late. "You are no longer my mother." Yu spat. "You are a monster." She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised his hand. Leave now before I forget you ever gave birth to me." Rukiadu stared at him, her face a mask of pride cracking into disbelief. Slowly, wordlessly, she turned and walked away, not with the poise of a matriarch, but with the shame of a fallen tyrant. Ayu didn't look back. The funeral was held 2 days later. Yu dressed Fatima in the softest white fabric, braided her hair with the flowers she loved. He built her coffin himself, carving her name into the wood with trembling hands. The entire village came. They stood in silence as Yu spoke, his voice raw but steady. "She was an orphan," he began, "but she taught us what it meant to love. She was judged, and still she forgave. She was broken, and yet she healed others." He paused, looking out at the crowd, at the faces once twisted in judgment, now wet with regret. "She loved you all," he continued, "even when you didn't love her, even when you turned your backs." A woman began to cry. Then another Yu placed a hand on the coffin. "She was the light in my darkness, and now that she is gone, I will never be the same." The villagers bowed their heads, tears falling freely. Children placed wildflowers on her grave. Old men whispered prayers. For the first time, Fatima was seen, truly seen. But it was too late. That night, Yu sat alone beside her grave. Moonlight bathed the earth. Crickets sang softly. He whispered into the wind, "I failed you, my love. I should have protected you. I came home too late." He placed his hand on the soil. "But I promise you this. I will never let your memory fade. I will live for you. And one day, when my time comes, I will find you again." Above the stars shimmered, as if the heavens themselves wept for Fatima. And Yu, broken but no longer blinded, finally saw the truth. Love, true love, is eternal. Even death cannot silence it. The world had turned its back on Rukiadu. Once she had been revered. The proud matron head held high commands obeyed without question. Now she was but a shadow creeping through the edges of the village, her back bent, not with age, but with the crushing weight of shame. No one spoke to her. Children who once bowed respectfully now ran from her. Women she had once scolded now turned away in silence. Men who had once nodded politely now spat on the ground where she walked. Day after day, Rukiadu existed, not lived, haunted by the ghosts of her sins. At night, when the cold crept under the cracks of her abandoned home, Rukiadu lay awake, listening to the whispers that filled the silence. She heard Fatima's laughter, once sweet and bright, now twisted into sobs that tore through her dreams. She saw Yu's face eyes burning with betrayal. And sometimes when the night grew darkest, she swore she could hear the faint heartbeat of the grandchild she had never met, fading away into nothingness. Her soul was a barren wasteland, her heart a tomb. She was alone, and she deserved it. Seasons changed. Rain came and went. Crops grew and were harvested. But Rukiadu remained a rotting fixture in a village that had outgrown her cruelty. And then one bitter winter morning, her body finally began to betray her as surely as her heart had. A fever gripped her. Her skin burned as if the fires of her sins had finally found her. Her once proud hands, which had dictated the fates of others, now trembled uselessly. She called for help, once, twice, 100 times. No one came, not the neighbor she had gossiped about, not the merchant she had cheated, not the girls she had mocked, not the boys she had scolded. The world had forgotten Rukiadu, just as she had once wished to forget Fatima. Days blurred together. The house became a prison of silence and fevered hallucinations. Shadows stretched along the walls like accusing fingers. The roof dripped with unseen tears. Rats scurried at the corners of her vision, whispering names. She tried so hard to forget. Fatima Yu, the child. In her dreams, Fatima stood at the foot of her bed, silent and sorrowful. her eyes two endless oceans of grief. Rukiadu sobbed in her sleep, begging for forgiveness. No lips answered. Her end was coming. And then, when all hope was lost, a knock came at the door. A soft, gentle knock. So soft, Rukiadu thought it must have been a figment of her fevered mind. But no, there it was again. She dragged her frail body across the floor and opened the door with trembling hands. There, standing in the soft light of the dying afternoon, was a girl, a stranger, but not a stranger. Her hair fell in waves like midnight silk. Her posture was straight, proud, yet humble. Her smile, faint, sad, was eerily familiar, but it was her eyes that made Rukiadu stagger back. Those eyes, deep, soulful, filled with an almost unbearable kindness. They were Fatima's eyes, unborn. The girl spoke, her voice a melody of warmth and sorrow. "Peace be upon this house." Rukiadu gripped the doorframe for support. Who are you?" "My name is Nura," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The house, filled with rot and bitterness, seemed to brighten slightly at her presence. "I have come to see you, Rukiadu." The old woman shrank back. "Why to mock me, to watch me die?" Nura shook her head, her dark eyes shimmering with compassion. "No, I came to forgive you." The words hit Rukiadu harder than any blow ever could. She fell to her knees, the last remnants of her pride crumbling into dust. "Forgive me," she rasped, "after all I've done." Nura knelt beside her, placing a soft hand on her shoulder. "Yes." Tears flooded Rukyadu's eyes, hot and blinding. "Why?" she sobbed. "I took everything from you, from your mother. I am a monster." Nura's smile was both sorrowful and wise. "My mother taught me that hatred breeds only more hatred, that the greatest victory is not revenge, but forgiveness." Rukiadu wept, truly wept. For the first time in years, every tear that fell from her eyes washed away a sliver of the darkness that had imprisoned her heart. Through her tears, Rukiadu asked the question that had haunted her since the night Fatima died. How are you alive? I thought the baby." Nura nodded gently. "I was born early. You found Fatima collapsed but still breathing. He rushed her to the city hospital. They could not save my mother, but they saved me." Rukiadu gasped, clutching her chest. "My son," she whispered. "He saved you even after losing everything." "Yes," Nura said, her voice soft as the falling snow outside. "He raised me with love. He taught me never to judge others by their past, but by their capacity to change." The words tore through Rukyadu's soul like a balm and a blade all at once. Change, could she change? Was redemption even possible for someone like her? Looking at Nura, the living embodiment of mercy and hope, Rukiadu dared to believe it was. From that day on, Nura visited often. She cleaned Rukyadu's broken home. She brought her warm food, fresh water. She sang old songs that Fatima once loved. She read stories aloud as the old woman lay weakly on her cot. And slowly, under Nura's care, Rukyadu's health began to return. But more importantly, her soul began to heal. The villagers, seeing Nura's kindness, began to soften. Some left food at the door. Others, shame-faced, offered nods from a distance. Rukiadu asked for nothing. She knew she did not deserve kindness. And yet every smile, every loaf of bread, every whispered prayer from a passerby felt like a stitch mending a torn, bleeding heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, Rukiadu sat outside her door wrapped in a worn shawl. Nura sat beside her, weaving a garland of wild flowers. "Tell me about her," Rukiadu said suddenly. "Tell me about my Fatima." Nura looked up, surprised, but then smiled. She spoke of Fatima's laughter, how it filled rooms like music. She spoke of her courage, how she stood up for the weak. She spoke of her dreams, small and tender like the dreams of a girl who only ever wanted to belong. and Rukiadu listened, tears streaming freely down her face. Every word was a blade of regret, but also a seed of peace. When Nura finished, Rukiadu whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me a second chance, even if I don't deserve it." Nura leaned her head against Rukyadu's shoulder as if they were grandmother and granddaughter by fate and forgiveness, not blood. "Everyone deserves a chance to choose a different ending," she said. That night, under a canopy of stars, Rukiadu knelt beside her bed. For the first time in years, she prayed, not for herself but for the souls she had wronged, for Fatima, for you, for Nura. And though her voice cracked and her old bones ached, there was a lightness in her chest, a lifting of the darkness. Perhaps she thought redemption wasn't earned all at once. Perhaps it was sewn stitch by painful stitch through tears, apologies and the courage to be better. Perhaps it was about living every day from now on with a heart wide open, filled with the kind of love she had once crushed underfoot. Rukiadu smiled through her tears. Tomorrow she would rise. Tomorrow she would begin again. Not as the woman she was, but as the woman Fatima had believed she could be. The winds of time never forget the seeds sown by love. Years passed like the turning of soft golden pages. Seasons shifted. Children grew. The world changed. But in the heart of the village once stained by sorrow, a new chapter was unfolding. At its center stood a young woman named Nura Strong, wise, compassionate beyond measure. She bore the grace of her mother, Fatima, and the steadfast heart of her father, You. Yet, she was entirely her own soul, a beacon forged by the fires of pain and the waters of forgiveness. Nura had not merely survived her past, she had shaped it into something breathtaking. From a young age, Nura knew that her life carried a purpose larger than herself. She saw the faces of orphaned children, in the markets, in the dusty alleys, at the temple steps. Their eyes hollow, filled with the same loneliness her mother once endured. And in every tear-streaked face, she saw Fatima. Nura vowed to break the cycle, to build a sanctuary where love, not cruelty, would write the stories of the lost. With relentless determination, Nura saved every coin, knocked on every door, and rallied every heart she could reach. Some doubted her. Some whispered that she was too young, too naive. But Nura carried the unshakable conviction of a soul rooted in something deeper than ambition. She carried her mother's dreams. Finally, on a brilliant morning kissed by sunlight and songbirds, the house of Fatima opened its doors. It wasn't just a building of stone and timber. It was a living monument of hope. Above the entrance, in delicate hand-carved letters read, "Fatima's home, where love heals." Inside, warm beds awaited small, tired bodies. Bright murals splashed the walls with joy. Shelves overflowed with books and toys, lessons and laughter. But the greatest treasure was the love that pulsed through every corner, a love that wrapped around the children like a mother's embrace. Here they were not forgotten. Here they were not broken. Here they were seen. Nura personally welcomed every child, memorizing every name, every fear, every hope. And at night, under the gentle hum of stars, she sat by the hearth telling them a story. The story of a woman who, despite the world's cruelty, never let her heart grow cold. The story of Fatima. It became a legend among the children. The girl who loved when it was easier to hate. The woman who forgave when it was easier to destroy. The mother whose love outlived even death. They listened wide-eyed, clinging to every word, their hearts filling with the belief that if Fatima could rise above sorrow, so could they. In time, the house of Fatima grew beyond the village. It became a symbol, a flame carried from heart to heart, town to town, until even distant cities spoke of it with awe. Women came from all corners, women who had been broken, silenced, discarded, and found strength again through Fatima's story, through Nura's unwavering kindness. They rebuilt their lives. They raised their children differently. They taught the next generation that the most powerful weapon was not hatred, but love. And through it all, You watched his heart heavy, yet whole. He had grown older, his hair silvered by sorrow and the slow march of time. His once strong hands now trembled, and his eyes, though still sharp, carried the weight of decades. But when he looked at Nura, he saw a living testament that everything, every sacrifice, every tear, every sleepless night, had meant something. He spent his days tending to the gardens around the house of Fatima, teaching the children how to plant seeds and nurture life. At sunset, he would sit on the porch, Nura beside him, and together they would remember. They spoke often of Fatima, not in mourning, but in celebration of her laugh, of her stubbornness, of the fierce way she had loved without expecting anything in return. Sometimes you would cry quietly when no one was looking, but most days he simply smiled, knowing that Fatima had not truly left him. She lived in every act of kindness, every joyful shriek of a child running barefoot across the fields. And most beautifully, she lived in Nura's every breath. One golden evening, as a festival approached, and the village bustled with preparation, Nura stood before the newest addition to the house of Fatima, a statue. It was a simple, graceful sculpture of a woman standing tall, her arms outstretched in welcome, her face serene and strong. At its base, the words were engraved, "Fatima, she chose love." Villagers gathered in hushed awe. Children placed wildflowers at the statue's feet. Old women who had once gossiped and scorned now wept openly. Men who had once turned their backs now bowed their heads in reverence. Fatima had become more than a memory. She had become a legend of love so fierce it refused to die. As the crowd parted, Nura approached the statue alone. She placed her hand on the cool stone and closed her eyes. She thought of everything, the pain, the injustice, the loneliness, and how through it all, Fatima had never stopped loving, not once. And because of that love, Nura now stood here. Not broken, but whole, not bitter, but blooming. She whispered, voice trembling with emotion, "Mama, I carried your love. I didn't let the pain become my legacy. I made it hope." The wind stirred, lifting her hair like a mother's tender touch. You, watching from the porch, felt his heart swell with pride and grief and joy all at once. For a moment he thought he saw her, Fatima, standing beside their daughter, smiling. Then, with the setting sun draping the sky in hues of fire and gold, Nura lifted her head and smiled back at the world. She was no longer just a survivor of sorrow. She was a sower of hope, and her mother's love would live forever. In every heart brave enough to believe that kindness could change the world. And so the story of Fatima did not end in tragedy. It lived, grew, and blossomed. A legacy stronger than any hatred, more enduring than any cruelty. A legacy carried forward by a girl with Fatima's eyes and an unbreakable heart. A legacy that whispered through the corridors of time. Love always finds a way. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey through the heart-wrenching story of Fatima and you. Your support means the world to us, and we hope this tale left an impact on you as much as it did on us. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more captivating tales like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a moment of our content. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave a comment and share your feelings about the story. Your feedback inspires us to create more powerful stories for you.